you are living in a state of survival as opposed to joy. Then once you turn that part of the brain back on where, the body feels safe and we're all calm again, think straight, then you can think, actually, what do you want though? As opposed to what's the smartest move. That's fine. We can work with what's smart, but also what do you want? What's your values? What do you care about? How do you want to live your life? What do you want from life?
Money is never just about money. It's about who we are, what we've been through, and the systems we live within. And that's what we talk about here on the Money Story Project. This is a storytelling project about money and what it means to be human inside systems that so often forget our humanity. These are real stories from real people. I'm Harriet Formby, a chartered accountant, fractional CFO and trauma-informed finance coach. I invite people to tell their own money stories. We also bring in subject matter experts who share both their lived experience and their professional wisdom, helping us make sense of what we've carried and our path forward. Today I'm joined by Gemma Donnelly. Gemma is an anxiety and confidence coach for busy professionals and business owners. Her work focuses on anxiety, confidence and nervous system regulation in high pressure environments. It's really great to have Gemma with us. So Gemma, please can we start with essentially getting into your money story? So for you, what is your money story?
Well, hi, thanks for having me. First of all, my money story is I grew up in a working class family. I was the youngest of 4 children to a single parent, my mummy, and I would have seen her work very hard at various points in my childhood, often have a few jobs at a time whilst looking after us. So I'm sure that definitely shaped my perception and beliefs around money in terms of working hard, and definitely fueled my work ethic. And I'm sure that's what, led to that. And when I was much younger, I previously worked in a legal career. That was my initial profession, and experienced burnout at a young age. And that was definitely contributed to by my intense work ethic back then. And that was the initial stages of then what drove me into retraining in the mind body years later. But I went from then in terms of career, building up a career in consultancy, so a very corporate job with a lot of security or perceived security financially, to then leaving that all behind, quitting that and setting up my own business. So I've been coaching for 6 years now, retrained many years ago and have been doing various different trainings over the years. But in terms of that relationship with money, I went from then having a very well-paid, secure job, certainly society's perception of success, to then beginning again and being a business owner, entirely responsible for myself, of course, with a mortgage. And yeah, that's my money story in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Gemma. That's really interesting. And I'm sure it will resonate with a lot of people that maybe have come from a background of, working in a kind of more corporate or employed setting and then starting a business. And there's lots of touch points with money and your finances that come up. So
yeah, absolutely.
That, sort of stands out for you in that, what you kind of...
I'd say when I was younger, I attached money with security. And so therefore I probably would have, in my early career, that would have held me back in taking what I perceived as risky moves at the time, because I was opting for safety and security and in terms of financially. And I do see that in the clients and stuff that I have worked with over the years since. So definitely that popped up for me, leaving a very well paid job to go full time in having a business. And anybody that has a business knows that that's complete uncertainty. So At that stage, though, I had been doing things in relation to my own nervous system, my own inner work, and I actually didn't see that as a risky move at that time. But years before, if I hadn't done my own inner work, there's no way I would have took the leap into being self-employed and having a business. So I'd say for myself, my money story, in terms of my experience with that, was probably being risk averse in relation to taking decisions career wise, and then also probably holding myself back in my younger years in relation to promotions or seeing the value in myself. And that's something that I definitely did through my own inner work and help other people to do as well.
Yeah, I can see how it's something that's been, very important for your own sort of story. And then obviously we'll get into how that's, transitioned into your business and your career that you're pursuing now. And you mentioned a bit about the kind of childhood side of your money story, and it sounds like that might have, on reflection, does it all make sense now, maybe where the feeling of needing security was coming from in terms of kind of early experiences around money?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, your early experiences do have an imprint, but it doesn't have to shape your whole story. So absolutely, it would have had an impact. But then whenever you become more self-aware and understand yourself at a deeper level, then you get to decide, which cards you play and whether you want to play out old patterns and how you can support yourself. So knowing that, like, you need security from that perspective, whichever perspective, we all need security. We all need safety in our own mind and nervous system.
True.
But when you become aware of that need, then you can then get and learn about different tools and techniques to provide yourself with that own sense of internal security.
Yeah, that's so powerful, isn't it? Having your own, kind of mechanisms to find it within yourself. So I know you work with people on kind of confidence and self-worth. I imagine that shows up a lot around things like kind of pricing, asking to be paid if they're business owners, knowing your worth. And what do you see coming up in your work kind of in relation to money? I know obviously you deal with lots of things aside from money, but a lot of roads lead back to money, don't they? So what do you see coming up with your kind of clients and things?
So I think of many different examples, but in terms of, I'd say people thinking that they need more confidence to make a career move or to go for a promotion, and it's more about self-trust and security sometimes than it is about confidence, and so then we'll create that within them. It feels like a lot of pressure for people if they are the sole breadwinner. So I do see that, where they are wanting to make a move, whether that's working for themselves or taking a promotion within work, changing jobs. And that can be more difficult if you are the sole breadwinner of a family, of course. And so for myself, then it's helping them feel secure in themselves so that they can do that. And their perception of risk in that might be outdated in the sense that, sometimes we're all working off earlier programs that were laid down, for example, in childhood, where we might have had uncertainty around money and we attach security to that. And therefore it creates a lot of resistance if we're wanting to take a move. But sometimes then that can see people feeling stuck, but then keeping themselves stuck because of that. And also, like you mentioned, in terms of charging their worth or agreeing a promotion, accepting less than what they're worth. And I absolutely believe that your net worth is not your self-worth, but if someone doesn't see the value in themselves, it's very hard for them to negotiate, whether that be a salary, an employed position, or charge their worth in business. Absolutely. So help in relation to both those elements.
Yeah, and I imagine that sometimes that comes back to kind of the stories we tell ourselves about our identity and who we are and what we're capable of, and that can get stuck in a bit of a loop of old patterns and stuckness. And it sounds like that's something that is definitely so important then when you're working through like promotions and charging and what you can do. I love that phrase you said about your your net worth is not your self-worth. I think that's so true, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. It also comes up in other ways, like, for example, if you have had limited money in the past, you might actually not feel like you can hold on to money that people can spend a lot then, because they're just not used to having it. So it's like they just feel uncomfortable having it. It's not necessarily that they, want to earn more or that's their aspirations. It's that they want to be able to manage their money more because they're not used to having it. So they spend it to get rid of it because they're not used to it.
That's something, I've definitely seen coming up in my work with clients, is actually you think it's about lack that cause, obviously does cause stress, but actually having money and dealing with, do I feel worthy of this money?
Yeah.
And I'm not used to this because I've come from, maybe there's been lack in my life and now I've got like abundance, and sort of recalibrating yourself to kind of trust yourself, and also, energetically feel kind of comfortable holding money. The second part is knowing, logically what to actually do with it, like investments and, managing your money. But the first part is just the, emotional level, isn't it? Of kind of, how do I deal with this? How do I process this situation and get used to this idea and feel worthy of it?
Exactly. And actually get to enjoy it as well, because, there's one hand of like holding on, like, oh gosh, I can't spend this. What happens if it's not going to come in again? That fear around that. But then there's the other fear of like, actually, am I worthy of then going and doing the nice things that then they're able to do financially, but part of them may not feel worthy, or, blowing it all because it's just not something they're used to having.
Yeah, it's so much there to kind of think about and to kind of process, isn't there? And I can see there's so much power in doing that. So how does that work in terms of, if anyone's sort of listening to this who's thinking, yeah, that sounds like me, like, what would you recommend to them to, in terms of your kind of approach and things?
Well, because I focus a lot on anxiety and confidence, it's in terms of this, it would be, how safe do you feel in relation to money? How safe do you feel in relation to having it, holding it, knowing what to do with it, that you deserve to receive it? And then it'll be increasing their capacity in all of those areas. And so then whenever all of us feel safe and secure within ourselves, so that's like nervous system capacity, nervous system work, then you've got that baseline of safety to then take what you may perceive as a risky move, like going for a job promotion, changing jobs, making a decision in your business, investing in yourself, because you've got that baseline of safety within your body. So for me, there's lots of different tools and techniques, obviously coaching the mind and the nervous system. So be creating safety within them internally with people. Then they're like, okay, well, now I trust in life, in myself, my ability. Then they're able to make those decisions and moves with confidence, because they're like, yeah, okay, it's fine now. And the perceived risk is not there anymore, or it's dialed down a notch where it's an absolutely manageable, educated decision. And it's also about finding out obviously what's right for that person at that point in time. What just helps supporting their growth and development, really, whether that's personal or professional.
And we've touched on a little bit about how, there's this thing that comes up when you shift from employment to running your own business, which is something, well, I've got personal experience of, you've got experience of, and you work with people kind of, in that transition as well at times. Yeah. Something that, isn't always talked about is that you are experiencing often a change in your financial situation.
Yeah.
And, sometimes if you've gone from like a, regularly well-paid job and you can predict when money's coming in and you've got enough to kind of set aside for savings. And then, when you start a business, sometimes there's an element of you're having to get things set up and you maybe can't pay yourself for a bit, or you've got different priorities suddenly because you don't quite know how much money's coming in or what the pattern's going to be. And that can have an impact where, the people around you maybe don't quite understand what's going on because they're not maybe going through this as well. And What do you see happening when people transition into working for themselves around that kind of situation?
It definitely differs. I'd say it depends on their relationship with uncertainty. So whether that's something that they feel comfortable with or not, because having a business is by its very nature uncertain. So kind of if you are a risk taker, you're probably totally fine with uncertainty. If you've always kind of done that, you wouldn't really see starting a business or growing a business as a risk because it's your norm. That's something you've always done. But if you've opted for, the traditional path or, being employed or staying with the same company for most of your life, then that will most likely feel very unnerving for you. So then like obviously anxiety would kick in. And then what I see then is obviously then people seeking support because having a business is challenging, just like it is challenging working at a senior level in a business. But you then need tools and techniques to support you through that uncertainty. So then that's why then they want coaching and support for their own growth professionally and personally to help navigate that uncertainty.
Yeah, that really makes sense in terms of the idea of, I'm just reflecting on my own my own journey in terms of I was somebody, I guess, that was quite risk tolerant in that I would change roles and not really think I'd leave jobs without another job to go to, and I'd be like, it'll be fine, that's fine, we're gonna sort it out, and a few months later I'm sorted. And actually that probably, on reflection, then going into working for myself, and I did transition with like going part-time and then setting something up on the side and then transitioning as well. I hadn't really considered how, imagine if you'd been like in the same job for like 10 or 20 years and then we're going to set up a business, or perhaps the circumstances are that maybe there's been like a redundancy and then this is not necessarily been your choice. You may be thinking, I would like to set up a business one day, but suddenly like it's, circumstances mean that it's now because that's what's the events are that are happening around you. And it's like, well, I might as well because I've got a redundancy package or something. But actually that's such a change if you've been very, if you're in maybe a industry or a role that is very stable, and it's like such a shock then, isn't it, compared to that's really interesting because it's not something I'd considered. I considered the difference between going from regular job to entrepreneurship, but actually just the nature of it being so different as well in terms of that people have some people listening will have been resonating with the idea of changing jobs quite regularly, and other people will be like, well, actually, no, I did this for a very long time. And especially if you do something like, I don't know, something like teaching or like something, where you're very much in a very specific profession, and then, it all changes one day when you leave and set up a business. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say, like your approach, there's no right and wrong approach to do anything, but in terms of increasing your ability to deal with uncertainty, that's then definitely increasing your capacity to do that. So like you did it in staged form in terms of them being part-time, and I think like that's saying increasing your own tolerance in terms of your nervous system's capacity to hold uncertainty. So it's just aging slightly more into uncertainty each and every time, the bigger risk to your mind, because obviously risk is perception, but not just in the mind and body. I mean, you'll certainly feel it, anxiety everywhere if ever that kicks in. And so, it's definitely about increasing your capacity. But I would say if people are thinking about making moves, it's about in different ways, whether that's like in promotion, changing jobs slightly, roles slightly. It's about getting the right support network around you in terms of people that are either doing the same thing so that you can at least have conversations with them and those shared experiences. Because if, like, you mentioned that person that's been in the same job for 20 years and then they're making a move, if all their friends and connections are still in that old job, that will be challenging for them to then try and make a move. And because they won't relate to other people around them. So there's so many different groups, and whether that's networking groups or social groups or even on social media, people that they can speak with that have a shared interests or experiences, so that then it's less risky, or they can at least talk about their experience with someone else and obviously getting support, whether that's coaching or anything else, but yeah, support to hold the uncertainty and to make the decisions you want to make that's right for you, that aren't actually like a knee-jerk reaction. Like you mentioned, redundancy there. Sometimes that, I mean, it's a great opportunity to go and do the thing that you've always maybe wanted to do and didn't do. And I work with people in relation to that too. But also I think whenever the rug has been pulled from under your feet, then it depends on your nervous system, be put into survival mode where the mind's just trying to self-protect, and you'll maybe not make the most the decision that's necessarily the best one for you. It's you're just responding to that perceived threat in the moment, and like the need for survival, as opposed to then being able to think, I wouldn't say rationally about it, but like that, where you're like, actually what's right for you in this moment. When we're really anxious, the logical part of the brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex, isn't switched on. It's not active. So we're not actually thinking with that part of the brain. We're literally working out of survival. So if you're in uncertainty, if that rug has been completely pulled from you, then you're not going to be able to think straight. Whereas if you can kind of like increase your capacity of that uncertainty and your nervous system tolerance, resilience, then you can feel nervous, or you can feel a little bit apprehensive, but you can still think clearly and think, okay, but actually, is this going to best support me, support my family? Is this taking me in the direction that I want to go in, career-wise or long-term? So yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's something that I've kind of come across as well, as the idea that the sort of your bandwidth for being able to make decisions is completely sort of shot to pieces when you're in that stress state, because your body is not in the space of logical, rational, calm decision making. It's like, get me out of this situation as quickly as possible. And the first step, which is sometimes counterintuitive, I think sometimes, from what I understand, is just to kind of like do what you need to do to de-escalate the state, because then you'll be able to think again and make good decisions. But the what you try and do is rush to make the decision to get it over with quickly, but that's often then not ideal, because you really want to be making decisions where you can from a more calm and balanced perspective.
And that pressure to make a decision when you're in uncertainty is only going to add to the frustration that you have within yourself. And like, and it's only going to make you feel more stuck. Like when we're in that state, we're literally in the stuck part of the nervous system. So uncertainty stems from that. But then whenever you recreate safety back in the body, and then you're like, okay, now I can think about this in a way that suits me. But you're absolutely right in terms of deactivating the threat initially, and then the logical part of the brain pops back online, and then we can work with that and think more creatively, because that's another thing. Like we can't think creatively whenever we're in survival.
Yeah, and if there's options, and that's particularly comes back to the earlier thing we were talking about, is when you've got money, suddenly you've got options. It's like, well, I could do this, I could spend it on that, I could invest it, I could go on holiday, I could get a new car, I could, do all these different things. And actually that can be challenging then, because if the situation is stressing you and you've got to think, and there's lots of things to think about, it's like you want to be in a calm state, because actually you can be creative with the answers, because there's lots of different ways of looking at it. And when you are in a state where you can take on this information, then you can process all the different thoughts, I suppose, in a more effective way. And actually, like you said, have some fun with your money. Like you mentioned, it's actually meant to be about having, spending it in a way that's going to bring you enjoyment as well. It's not just about like survival. Then
I know. And tapping into that uncertainty element before, then that you are living in a state of survival as opposed to like joy. And I think then once you turn that part of the brain back on, where the body feels safe and we're all calm again, think straight, then you can think, actually, what do you want though? Like as opposed to what's the smartest move. That's fine. We can work with what's smart, but also what do you want? Like what's your values? What do you care about? How you want to live your life? What do you want from life?
Yeah, the more sort of authentic side of like not just what you should think you should be doing, but actually what you want to do.
Yeah.
As your kind of your personality and your own interests. Yeah. And we've mentioned a little bit about, what happens when there's maybe financial instability and risk around that. And it's inevitable that if you're feeling unstable financially, that you're going to be having something, reactions in your body. But I think the slightly more complex angle is that it's not always about the current events. Like we talked a little bit about your upbringing, growing up, and that maybe there's some stuff from there. And the idea that actually is not, financial instability is then going to impact you differently depending on what's already going on in your nervous system. So I'd love to unpack that a bit in terms of like, what does uncertainty around money actually do to someone who's already carrying like old wounds or past experience, which may or may not be directly related to money, and like how that shows up in the body?
It really does differ for every person, essentially though, we're either motivated towards something or away from something else. So obviously the motivation away from pain. So if you have, for example, if you kind of have there's not like a clear-cut answer in relation to like, oh, you've had one kind of childhood experience and that will mean this in adulthood. There can be a whole array. But if you have noticed, say, lack in what then that can create is then your motivation towards, say, creating money or generating money, generating wealth. And sometimes there's no end to that driver, in terms of that when is it enough? So like people can be incredibly wealthy and have so much money, more than what they can know what to do with, but it's still not enough because there's still that perception of lack. So that can show up. And then obviously then that's a real driver for people really driving themselves to burnout. I'm not feeling like they are enough because, like I said earlier, sometimes we can attach our self-worth to our net worth. And so then people are attaching then their level of self-worth to how much money they earn. And if there's never an end to that, that can obviously result in burnout. So showing up in the body in various ways. So when we work ourselves, I've experienced burnout myself, when we work to excess, that can show up in the body over time. Sometimes it doesn't take like a very long time, and other times it can take years, where therefore, it's anxiety on a regular basis, or just ad hoc. It doesn't necessarily need to be an anxiety condition, but it can also show up in terms of sleep, the quality of sleep, deep REM sleep, how good is your sleep, how easy do you find it to switch off? Is it okay to not work? How do you feel about resting? Is that okay for you, or is it very uncomfortable? Do you constantly feel the need to be doing something to be productive? So it can show up in that way in terms of that drive to constantly be doing something, uncertainty. And that's financial uncertainty, but that can be any element of financial uncertainty.
For those of you listening, if this episode is resonating, please do leave a review and make sure you are following wherever you get your podcast from, so you'll be the first to hear when the next episode lands. And if you know of a pal or a business friend who would enjoy this conversation as well, please forward it on to them, tell them all about it so they can enjoy it as well. Okay, let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, and where does that in particular, like where might we notice that showing up in the body?
Yeah. Uncertainty in the body definitely comes up as tension. So we can hold tension a lot in our jaw, and not even maybe notice that we are. If you're grinding your teeth at nighttime, you might not notice that you do that. You might go to the dentist and they'll ask you, are you grinding your teeth? Probably because you are not really in a deep enough REM sleep. The back of the neck here, so where the head meets the neck, the brainstem, so right back here, can often hold a lot of tension. So the shoulders as well, that saying, we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, because often our shoulders can become tense and the body can become inflated because, we're almost armoring ourselves, and literally we are. So if you are feeling yourself shrugging your shoulders, becoming narrower in, trying to almost protect yourself. It's literally your body trying to armor itself when it feels uncertain and unsafe, any element of uncertainty, financial and otherwise. A lot is in the lower back. So the lower back would be one of the main areas. So a lot of pain down round there and down there, that feeling of instability and uncertainty can often show up there. But yeah, tension anywhere in the body. But in terms of main areas, lower back, the jaw, chest, a lot of us hold a lot of tension in our chest, worry with chest, so that's uncertainty, most likely going to be around that region.
Yeah. So it's I think we're getting better at realizing on the whole that, all of this stuff manifests in physical symptoms. It's all linked, essentially how we feel, how we are in our bodies, and it's all, but sometimes I think we don't always get the link. It's almost like, I've got a bad back or a headache, so I'll just take something for that and I'll carry on tapping away on my laptop and not kind of getting the message. But it's I think a lot of it does come back to kind of conditioning in terms of, certainly from my background, it's kind of like you've learned in society that to be safe you need to be working hard and always doing better and always looking for more. And that can be really something I've kind of worked on, kind of unlearning, but it's okay to not do things all the time, or to just like relax a bit and not worry about the next goals for, and that's something that you don't realize is happening because it's happened all through like education and, workplaces and society and, people you talk to and stuff. But actually it's, it definitely comes into your kind of mindset around working and business and also money, and it's all interlinked really, isn't it? But it's something that you get to then choose which bits you're going to kind of keep up with. And sometimes those physical symptoms are really things that bring it home then if you've ignored the other signs and the stressing elements. It's the physical stuff that makes you take notice then, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately so. And often, whenever we take a holiday, we've just had, say, Christmas, that's when a lot of people will become sick because it's the first time they've stopped in a long time and their body catches up with them. And it's so inconvenient to then finally be on holiday and then you get ill. Like, it's so frustrating that that's whenever a cold or a flu pops in. But it's a body then finally stopping and actually recalibrating. But of course, unfortunately, stress can contribute to, if not is the main contributing factor to lots of illness and disease, so which of course stems in the body. But a lot of that stems back to like autoimmune diseases, chronic fatigue, digestion issues, digestion food, irritable bowel, so many different things are connected back to the stress in the body. And of course, if you have a natural tendency, we all have patterns of behavior, and if you notice your pattern of behavior and your response, whether that's like overworking or different things, you've got the option to choose a different response. Yes, and that's great because that stems from awareness. But if you're not even at that stage, because you might not be at that stage, then it's like, okay, if you want to carry on doing what you're doing, how are you going to even try and support yourself to do that? If you want to carry on giving 110% or, without burning out, are you going to do stuff to help your nervous system and your mind in the meantime? What are you going to do to support that output? I'm not suggesting, by the way, that you should obviously work yourself to burn out, but if you are you at least trying to help yourself in that stage? That would be the first point.
That's such a good point, because often we talk about just rest, but actually you can't necessarily go from really, really working hard all the time and not burnout to just resting, because some people it's like that's they just think I may have been here myself, thinking, no, I can't, I've got all this stuff to do, I can't just rest. But actually then, rest is one option, is a good option, but also there's okay, well, how, whilst I'm having, and sometimes this comes up, I've got a busy period where there's going to be pressure and there's going to be a lot to do, how can I resource myself to manage this? But also I must remember to rest at some, the other side of this, I will need to rest. But it's so important then, isn't it, to kind of think about it's not all or nothing. It's not like we're working hard or we're resting. It's actually, how do you do both as well? How do you integrate?
Yeah.
Which I guess you probably, is going to be stuff that you work with people on, essentially, and the kind of the mechanisms to maintain, a nice approach in between as well.
Yeah, because it can be so frustrating if someone tells you just to rest and you're like, well, that's not an option. I don't have time for that. Or, it's not even about time. It's about the fact that that doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel okay to rest. And actually, a lot of the time, if you've been on go, like your mind and nervous system has been on go, 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 and you ask them to stop, like it doesn't feel comfortable to stop. It doesn't feel enjoyable to rest. You're like, why would I do this? I'm thinking about the other thing anyway. I may as well go on and carry on working because I'm thinking about it. So it's about increasing your tolerance, your capacity to have rest, and actually then finding joy in that. And but also then maybe, okay, you don't want to factor in time to do nothing, but can you factor in time to do productive rest, of doing something that's going to be most supportive? Like, for example, I run an online club that's breathwork and hypnotherapy, and so it's for people that to just switch off, literally by working with the mind and the nervous system. So then if you have an overthinking mind and you're used to go, then at least you're like, well, I'm doing something in that time. And of course, it's very supportive, more supportive than sitting doing nothing, like scrolling on your phone or watching Netflix or anything like that. Because you're actually in the body at a cellular level, but it's going to feel safer for you if you're then saying, well, it's productive rest, if you're used to your time needing to be productive.
Yeah, and that's so important this time of year, because we've got, like you said, people switching off for Christmas, potentially, if you've had that sort of relaxed time where, the routine goes out the window. And then there's this sort of, we mentioned just before we started recording about like easing into January, but actually there's pressure around to kind of hit the ground running and New Year's resolutions and all of that, noise. But actually we're so set up to be, it's probably going to be a dip once we actually rest if we've had a busy year, and actually responding to that and going, how can I navigate this, and being gentle to yourself, not to have too high expectations, because you're probably, you said, might get sick. It's when the colds are all around and the flus and things, because we're just suddenly stopping, and then that seems to be when we get susceptible to being unwell. So I think it's a very timely message, isn't it, to kind of, what to do to rest, but also what to do if you feel unsafe to rest, as in you're like, but I've still got to do things. Well, this is what you can do. So that's really, really good messaging, good timing that we're speaking now.
I think, it's just about supporting you in whatever way too, like whether you're driven by achievement or whatever you're driven by, but it's supporting you in such a way that you can do that without losing part of yourself in the process.
Yeah. And we'd mentioned when we were kind of planning this episode that a really interesting topic, actually, the kind of crossover between attachment styles and money. And it'd be great if we could, we just talk about this and maybe firstly just explain what attachment styles are, if that's a new term for people, and how this might show up in relation to money, essentially.
I suppose, so like the main attachment styles are secure attachment styles. Secure is attachment styles is your relationship with people, but obviously it can show up in a relationship with anything. So the main ones are secure, anxious, and avoidant, and there can be overlap. There can be anxious, avoidant. But just to give a wee snapshot on each of them, secure is when you have like a very trusting relationship with other people and with yourself and with money and things. And anxious is where obviously you feel uncertain, uncertainty, the basis of that is a lack of trust. So whether there's a lack of trust in how you spend money, or how you relate to people, whether you like to get close to people or not, anxious, and like avoidant as well. Avoidant is like obviously wanting to detach yourself from people, and again, like we say, because we're always talking about money, that can go back to money. So if in terms of those attachment styles showing up in, it's quite obvious how that can show up in relationships with people, that's romantic, professional, whatever kind of relationships. But but also in relation to money. So avoidant, are you avoidant in terms of spending money? Are you avoidant in terms of asking for money? Are you avoidant in terms of putting yourself out there, whether that's, promoting your business or seeking a promotion or asking for that promotion you were in touch with many years ago and you never actually got, but you've been doing the job for a few years, avoiding and making the decisions around money, which money and career usually go hand in hand because obviously careers where you earn your money. So that's why I'm mentioning that. But it can also be like how you're spending your money. Again, we mentioned it earlier, like if you maybe old programming back in the day in childhood and you've not updated your software in terms of retrained the mind and the nervous system, if you originated from a place of lack, and that means that when you get money, even if that's an obscene amount of money, you just want to spend it and get rid of it because your baseline of safety, of comfort is not having, then you'll want to get rid of, which is also the same in terms of relationships. If you're not used to having a close relationship, a secure attachment style with people, then it feels more comfortable, more safe to get rid of them or like not feel that secure attachment. So I think it can pop up in relation to money. And you'd say that in terms of people that might like to hoard, it's because holding on to things because perhaps they've experienced loss before and therefore they don't want to let go of things. So it can show up in different ways, and that would then be in an anxious attachment style.
Yeah. And something that's come to mind as you're talking, actually, that I sort of notice in my work is that when, around sort of avoidant, that can also just be avoiding looking at your money, because you don't know what you're going to see there. And it's almost like a bit like maybe avoidant relationships with people. You kind of avoid having the difficult conversation. It's almost like having your difficult conversation with your money, as in like looking at it, looking in your bank account, looking at your different, consolidating debts or, working out on investments. And sometimes it's like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I'll do something else and distract myself because I don't want to go and open that door and look there because I don't feel resourced to, and it would be probably the same as, which is more your area really, about working through the kind of attachment styles. But in terms of like, how do you have that conversation? How do you open the door to that and sit there and look at your money and not kind of freak out and walk out the door and find something else to do, or, tidy up your kitchen instead, or
everything,
like that.
Every other task on the list apart from the one that we're avoiding. Yeah.
Some interesting stuff. Yeah. So I was just going to ask you, if somebody is listening to this and recognizing some of these things, that we've been talking about in themselves, and they're carrying elements of sort of financial stress, maybe they've been trying to push through it, as we mentioned, what do you want them to know, like, as the takeaway? If they've been listening in and thinking, gosh, I need to do something about, recognizing financial stress and a nervous system, like what would you like them to know as their sort of takeaway?
So I would definitely, I understand that mindset of pushing on and pushing through. Back in the day, I would have done the same. So I definitely resonate with that. Unfortunately, sometimes we can learn that it's not the best way because, like we mentioned earlier, it can show up in the body. So in terms of that stress and uncertainty, anything that we, whether that's in relation to money or career or business, that could be like earning more or just spending it in a way that serves you, then, that will definitely show up in the body before long and in your mind. So you're not getting the most out of yourself and out of life if you're not serving yourself. So if you're noticing, if anything, I suppose on this podcast has resonated, then that's just a little signal from yourself, probably from your heart, that you're needing to support yourself in a better way. And there's so many ways you can do that. And there's options at every single price point. So it's not like that needs to be really expensive in terms of that support. You can get support, like, for example, the self club that I run is, very nominal fee. And I think like you can get support in various different ways, even if it's just looking at your finances. That is free, isn't it? To like look at them in terms of what's coming in the bank, what's going out of the bank, where do you want to spend your money. But then of course, like getting someone that is qualified like yourself, Harriet, that can help advise on spending. There's so many different options right now, but I would say it's not just about what you're doing practically, it's about how you're supporting yourself in those times of stress and anxiety and uncertainty so that you can make the decisions like without literally living out of survival, and you're not going to make the best decision for yourself in that state because you're literally just opting out of survival. So just know that if you push on and push through, that's going to show up in the body before long and in the mind. And you want to tap into that before it disrupts your sleep or disrupts your health, because you ultimately, you only have one life.
Yeah, really good advice there. Wow, it's been, really, really interesting conversation we've had today. I think thank you so much for kind of sharing your wisdom and experience with this. And you mentioned the online community you've got, the Self Club. So that sounds like something that's, really accessible for people if they want to kind of explore this. So where can they find out more about this and kind of connect with you? And
my website is coachingwithgemma.co.uk, and also I am on Instagram. My handle is I am Gemma Donnelly. So the Self Club is one option. Obviously I coach one-to-one as well, and if you want more personalized support, particularly in relation to anxiety and confidence. So both of those are options.
We'll put all the links in the show notes so people can find out. And I think also hear that you're launching a new group program soon as well. Yes,
I will be working on
exciting.
that at the moment. As I said, I've been coaching on anxiety and confidence for like 6 years now. So anxiety is what I'll be focusing on in the group program. I'm really excited about that. So not just the mind and the body, so the nervous system as well as the mind. So helping people train both, so that my entire purpose is to bring more joy into people's lives. So whenever we're not anxious, we can live with more ease and flow, and just think everybody deserves that.
Amazing. Brilliant. Well, we'll make sure those links are in the show notes so people can find you. And thank you very much. It's been a really, really wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
You've been listening to the Money Story Project podcast with me, Harriet Formby. If you've enjoyed the episode, please follow the show, share it with someone who might want to have a listen, and if you can, leave a review. In the show notes, you'll find links to connect with our guest and to learn more about the project itself. And if you feel called to share your own money story, you'll find details there on how to be part of a future episode. Until next time, take care and have a great day.